Hey guys, what's going on? So today we're going to actually be doing a workshop on Solana Pay. So right here you can see I've got this like mock storefront here where you can order a pizza. And let's pretend for the sake of this demo that this is like a kiosk at the pizzeria where you can place your order and then you can pay using your phone using Solana Pay. So we're going to just pick our toppings. You can see the price changes based on what I add. And once we're happy with our order, we can choose which token we want to pay in. And I'm going to use Sol. And then I just scan the code with any wallet adapter that or wallet app that you have on your phone. It should look something like this. You should have the salami pizza prompt, and then you just hit pay. And once that goes through, you can see that the app has changed now, and it has confirmed our order. We've paid for it successfully, and it also wrote our order to the blockchain, where you can open it up right here, and you can see the toppings that we had in our order. My face is probably blocking that, but I'll pop this open real quick. You can see our order details down below right here, right? So pretty cool stuff. And I'm going to show you guys exactly how this is built, how we can leverage Solana Pay to do this. And I need to mention this at the beginning. I've talked about this in other videos, so I'm not going to go into huge detail, but I built this app on a scaffold called the DApp scaffold. Check this out on Solana Labs GitHub. This is a really great like boilerplate app that is built in Next.js that you can use to kind of like build your app on top of. So you can run this CLI command depicted in the image, npx create Solana DApp, and you can get this thing gen for you, and you can get started. So without further ado, if you check out Solana Pay on GitHub, you can actually go and look at the source code here for Solana Pay. And for those of you guys who don't know what Solana Pay is basically what creates this QR code that your wallet can then use to scan. And the whole point is for your wallet to be able to share its public key with the point of sale system so that the point of sale system can build a transaction with your public key in it. And then it can request your signature using your wallet on your phone where that transaction will then be sent. So I know that might not make a lot of sense at first, but if you go to the examples, you can open up the point of sale example, and there's actually some good details in here. And then you can also look at the Solana Pay docs, where they have a nice demo in a diagram of how this thing actually works. So let's see, it should be right in overview. There's a photo somewhere in here. There it is. So this is what's called a transaction request. And basically, as you can see, if I'm the customer, I have a wallet on my phone and I'm going to scan the QR code with my wallet. It's going to make a post request to the merchant server with my public key. And then with that public key, the server can then create a transaction, put the instructions in it, add me as the fee payer, add whoever is the fee payer, right? Add my public key where it needs to be. So in this case, it needs to mark that I'm the one who's getting the pizza, blah, blah, blah. And then it responds to the wallet with a serialized transaction. So everything all packaged up, ready to be signed and sent. And then the wallet processes it, shows you a preview of what's in that transaction. You select approve, like you just saw me do. And then it finally fires off the transaction to the Solana blockchain. And so it's really cool because it allows the merchant to build transactions for you, give them back to you, you sign it and send it, and it's all done. So this is really unique because it bridges that gap between like, hey, I have my phone and I don't have a way to just share with you my super long address because it's really long and a pain, right? So instead of me like emailing it to you or sending it to you on Telegram and you copy pasting it and then blah, 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 it just packages it up, puts it in my wallet on my phone. I can just hit a button and send it. And so we'll see all those components live. But just so you guys know, if you want to, you can go to the Solana Pay repo. You can pop open the examples, open point of sale, and you can actually walk through these steps. It's pretty straightforward. You clone it, you build it, you run a proxy, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then you can open this URL and you can plug in your wallet address and just like a label for your store's name. And it'll give you a QR code that you can then use to interact with. And then it's also got some steps on how to like add custom tokens and stuff like that. But it'll give you a way to actually use Solana Pay and feel it out. But we're going to just go right into the code because we already know how to do this. So if I've got my Solana Pay repo here, basically we're going to talk about how this thing's set up. Just a quick edit here, guys. You have to use ng-rock when you're doing this locally. You can see I've got my Node app running with just yarn dev and it's on port 3000. But I actually have to set up a tunnel to expose that port to the web using ng-rock. And that's going to allow something like your phone to actually send requests to your computer at that port, right? So ng-rock is a pretty useful tool. It's free to use, and you can just go ahead and sign up for an account and get ng-rock. And then you literally just do ng-rock HTTP and then the port that you want to forward. And that's all I'm doing right here. So you can see this like black terminal. And this is actually the URL that we're going to nav to instead of localhost 3000. Just wanted to call that out because you guys are probably going to run into problems if you try to scan the QR code just on localhost because your phone won't be able to hit it. Anyways, so for starters, we have a program that we wrote here that's going to allow us to demonstrate how to use custom instructions in a SolanaPay transaction as well. So I'll circle back to this some more, but ultimately this program is actually written in a Python framework called Seahorse. And what Seahorse allows you to do is exactly what I just said. It allows you to write your programs in Python and it will convert them into Anchor. So you'll get an IDL, you'll get serialization, stuff like that. So this is what a Seahorse program looks like. You can see inside the Seahorse folder is going to be some of the like typings and configs and everything that you're going to need to build a program. And then right here is our program. And it's very, very simple. And you can see with Python, it's even more elegant and clean. Basically, we are going to write this data to an account on chain every time you create a new pizza order, right? So we got one instruction, we got one data type for the account. It starts as an empty account. We're going to go ahead and write it and we're done, right? Init, that's all we need to do. And there's our seeds. So it's going to be the pizza, salami pizza is the string, the order ID, and then the payer, which is going to be whoever's wallet is connected and thus sending that transaction from the wallet on the phone. So pretty straightforward program. If you guys are interested in Seahorse, you can take a look at the docs. All you got to do is go to seahorselang.org. And this is going to be all the docs. You can download it. You can get installed. There's some cool like tutorials and stuff like that. And pretty much everything you'll need to learn how to use this. But anyways, since we know that we have a program that's going to write this data to the chain, we're going to see that instruction come into play in our app. But that's about all we need to care about here in our program folder. So if we bounce over to our app, this is actually using Next 13. And so it's got a little bit different repository layout than we might be familiar with. But ultimately, if you can see here, this is our program's IDL coming from the Anchor build. When Seahorse builds the program, it gives us this IDL. So we're going to use this. We've also got a couple of constants, including some simulated token addresses, our merchant's wallet, which is just a wallet that we're using as a default for the person receiving these tokens, and the program ID of the pizza program that we've already deployed. And then inside of order here, you can see here is us using Anchor to actually build that instruction that's going to create a pizza order on chain, right? And so we got some display pizza order stuff. We're just using Anchor to fetch that account and display it on chain in the front end. So pretty straightforward. And you can see again, here's that seed derivation for the address of the order. And we're going to use those as well. Now, if we look at our components, you can see here that, oh, that looks like it got deleted somehow. Our pay QR component, there it goes. This is going to be what actually creates the QR code to create that transaction request. So there's a bunch of junk in here that we will cover in a minute. But let's actually start out at the main page where we have all of our stuff. So there's a lot of stuff in here. And basically all this use state stuff we're going to cover as we go. But everything right here is just building the state representation of what's in our order. So not super important. Same with the use effect, right? And you can see that we're setting this reference. Now what this reference is for is it's a public key that we can use as a reference when we want to look up transactions that occurred with our point of sale. And you can use this reference as a unique identifier for each transaction. So that's why we're generating a new one every time. So you can use that reference and you can take a look at what happened in the transaction. And that comes in handy for verifying that like the proper number of SOL or tokens was sent, like balance changes were correct, other on-chain data was maybe created. And you can explore SolanaPay's docs as well for using this reference to validate information. We're not going to go too deep into that in this example. And then here, what we're doing with this use effect is we are actually going to check to find that reference and just verify that that transaction occurred. So in other words, if we're generating a new key pair every time that we're sort of like creating a new pizza order, then every time we run find reference on that key pair's public key, then we know that that's going to be the current transaction that we're dealing with at the moment. If you refresh the page, that's going to be lost because of this use effect here. So all that really means is we're looking for a transaction that occurred on chain that has this identifier in it. And that's the one that we're currently working with, right? So once you go through the motion and you actually send the transaction, because you're sending it from your phone and you click that button and send transaction from your wallet on your phone, your front end has no way to tell, at least with its own like source, how like when that transaction has actually been sent. So what you have to do is query the blockchain to see if that reference pops up. So that's what's happening here. And then once we do find it, we actually go ahead and get all of the stuff that happened in it, and we get the order pub key, and we go ahead and set the order details on screen. And then we give you the order public key, which you can then go find on the Explorer, which we'll see in a little bit. So we got all our different components, and you'll see how all these come into play, just adding and subtracting different toppings. And then finally, whenever the total amount is not zero, so we actually have some ingredients in our order, that's when we get this pay QR. And now here's where the Solana Pay stuff comes into play. So let's actually go and flip back to our front end real quick. If we refresh, you can see that we start out with 0 each. And like I said, once we add any topping, we get this QR. And we also get all these different tokens that we can pay with. And this whole like white box here is going to be what's in that pay QR component. So let's take a look at what that kind of looks like. So if we pop open the pay QR component, you can see that we got some props for our transaction request. And we've got some supported SPL tokens. And this is just a symbol of the token and its corresponding mint address. Keep in mind that Sol doesn't have a mint address. That's why it's optional. So as we go through this component, I've got this query builder util here that's just going to help us build a big query with a bunch of parameters. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually read these parameters from the requested query, right? And so you can see here is like reference. We're going to use the reference key, right? And so on and so forth. Amount. We're boiling it down to be a little less Sol, so it's not like one-to-one with the euros that you see on screen. And then we're just adding all of these things into the params. And then we're going to also add a parameter for token if the current token selection has a specified mint, right? So if it's not Sol, if there is an associated mint address, we also want the token to be a parameter as well. So we'll be passing what the current reference is that we're going to look for to see if this transaction went through, what the amount this person's going to be paying in whatever token, what token they're going to be using, if any. If not, it will be Sol. And then their order details. Those are all going to be request parameters. And finally, we build the URL to our own API. And so before I go any further, let's talk about where this thing actually lives. Well, with our next app, we can also have our own API. And so like the diagram we saw for SolanaPay right here, we have to actually create the ability to send a post request to our merchant server and a get request, right? So let's see what those look like in person. So our get request here is going to actually display what the request is going to look like. So here's our salami pizza message that comes up and the image that comes up. And this is what we're going to get back to our wallet as a preview of what's going to happen, or at least who we're kind of interacting with. And then our post request here is going to be where we actually return that transaction, right? So this is where the magic happens. So you can see that we're building the URL to our post request. It's always going to live right here, post API/transaction, but we're building out the necessary parameters that this thing's going to expect, right? So you can see here, we're going to parse it all out. And if token's not represented, it won't be added, right? So like you can see, like if token isn't part of this query payload, then it's going to just not put it in there, right? If it's in there, if it's not, parse error, right? So eventually we'll get all this information and we'll be able to determine who's the sender from the account field, what's the reference, and what's the amount. And then we set up this transfer config. And so basically, if our token is SOL, then we're going to just have undefined for this SPL token because we're just using SOL. So use the default. If it's not SOL, if it's an actual address, then we turn it into a public key object and pass it in as this parameter. And that's where we actually determine which, SPL token to use. Then we have like a message for the memo for the transaction. Thanks for buying a salami pizza, right? And we've got all of that information packaged up into the config. And then we create a transfer, right? So we create this transaction for a transfer. And this is actually a SolanaPay function, which is going to create a transfer function for us, a transfer transaction with all of our configs. And then we can actually add to the transaction an instruction for creating that order on chain using our program, right? So create transfer, that can use SOL or SPL tokens, depending on your config that you pass in. And then once we have the transaction that comes back, we can add instructions to it before we serialize it and send it back. And in this case, we're going to create that new pizza order and we're going to hit our program because we wrote this to do so, right? So this is going to hit our program using this anchor, program.methods.instruction. And it's going to give us the instruction to create our pizza order on chain and add it to the transaction that we're going to then be returning over HTTP. So here you can see us serializing that transaction. And then once it's serialized, we can return it back with the message to the person's wallet. And that's how it works. So all in all, the QR code is going to generate a QR to this API call, right? And then you can see that we're also adding a couple more configs to our QR. We're setting up like basically the shape and size of it. Then I've got the different buttons for the tokens, which are going to change the current token selection. And you can see like here, the mint is just SOL, but here it actually becomes an address. And that's where we're keying on that in the parameter later. And then finally, we just generate that QR code, right? So right down here is where the QR code gets generated. And you can see our current selection being displayed, etc. Right? So ultimately what's happening is that QR code is going to use the path to our API/transaction where it's going to do post and get, just like the SolanaPay spec, right? So we build that out into a QR and we actually use the QR from SolanaPay and we use the encode URL function as well. And we can set all this up, right? And then once it's set up, you can see from our page, once that transaction is executed, we actually flip over to this on-chain order details like Boolean here. If that's represented, like if that's not null, then we get this whole like card here where we're going to display. And yes, I know I could have componentized these more, whatever, where we're going to actually display all this stuff, including a link to see that order on chain as an anchor program account. So just to run through it one more time, guys, now that we know what's going on, I'm going to make sure I refresh just to make sure that we have a reference and we're not using a QR that we've already tried. And so we're just going to run through it one more time here. I'm just going to add a bunch of pepperoni. I'll add a ton of mushrooms. Why not? I'm sick. And then I will go ahead and just scan the code. You can see again, we get our salami pizza and it's going to tell us how much that we're going to be sending. And then when we hit pay, you can see once that goes through, our page changes. And that's because our wallet has sent that transaction from this wallet app on the phone. And the reference is inside of that transaction. So that function in the use effect statement is looking for that reference. And when it finally sees it, you can see there's like a tiny lag. It knows that that has executed. And then we can derive the address of that order. It's right here. And we can click this and open it in Explorer again, like we saw before. And we can see the order details here, which I'm going to have to make this small again. And we can see the order details right here where I have my 8 mushrooms, which is an interesting pizza topping choice. But anyway, guys, that's it, right? Like that's how you can create a storefront with Solana Pay. It's actually really cool because it's a very unique way to go about the process of actually sharing your public key with something that's not living on the same device that you're working on, right? So super cool stuff. Just another example of how you can use crypto in the real world without having to just have a wallet adapter and all the more like traditional stuff that we've been seeing in Web3. So hopefully you guys build something cool with that. And also this demo was a great way to show you that you can do more than just transfers of tokens. You can do any instruction, right? So have at it.